Hi everyone and welcome back. It's Mindy with Mindy Eggen Design, and today I'm going to be showing you two sets of cards that I created using a stamp set from the Gina K Designs November 2018 release. I'm also going to be featuring the Gina K Designs ink pads and some fun things that you can do with them. This first card here that I'm showing you is what we're going to be starting on first. This stamp set that we're starting with is called A Very Merry Christmas, and this is part of the November 2018 release. So it has these really big sentiments on it. Some of them are in Christmas shapes and some of them are just in the sentiment blocks. And this first technique that I'm going to show you is inspired from Jana Smokula. I seen her do this and I fell in love with it, and this set was absolutely perfect for it. So I'm taking the sentiment that's shaped like a Christmas tree, and using my Misty tool, I'm going to be stamping this in VersaMark ink. I'm first prepping my cardstock with an anti-static powder tool so that my embossing powder only sticks where I want it to. This cardstock is the red velvet cardstock, so this was the lighter red color that I could find that I had on hand. So I inked my stamp up really well with the VersaMark ink, pushed down really well to get that nice good impression, and then I'm going to sprinkle this with some silver embossing powder. This is also from Gina K Designs. You could do this in any color embossing powder. I think gold would be gorgeous, white would really stand out from the card, whatever your preference is. And then I'm going to take my heat tool and emboss that. You can see I'm going back and forth from front to back. I'm trying to prevent as much warping as possible. I still did get a little bit, but I prevented as much as I could. So now we're going to start on our ink blending. So I'm using cherry red and charcoal brown, and I know that charcoal brown kind of sounds like an odd combination to add, but just wait until you see what it does on this cardstock. It's gorgeous. So I'm doing this on top of just a craft mat, and I'm taking my jumbo sponge dauber and that cherry red ink, and I'm going around the edges. Now, because I do have a little bit of warping from the heat embossing, I'm just being careful how I'm holding my cardstock down. I don't want to bend my paper. I just want to get a nice smooth blend around the edges. So I am starting from the outside, working my way in, and as I'm working towards that sentiment, I'm using a lighter hand. I don't want to go all the way in. I want it to appear as if the tree is glowing with that lighter color cardstock underneath. So darker on the outside, lighter as I go in towards that tree. And I'm just going to clean up my mat here in between, get rid of that red. And then I'm going to come in with this charcoal brown. So I'm doing the same thing, except I'm not going in as far. I'm just going around those edges. And it was just enough. You can't really tell it's a brown because I already have that red tone underneath. It just looks like a really deep red, and I think this turned out just gorgeous. And these would be really easy to mass produce. If you wanted to make a bunch of Christmas cards, whether you're sending to relatives or friends, I think this would be super quick to whip out a bunch of cards with this technique, and I think it just really packs a punch. It's just a really gorgeous look. I have no other word to describe it. It's just a really pretty look to it. And then once I had that charcoal brown in there, I did go back in with the cherry red and kind of smooth it out a little bit. I was trying not to have any real distinct lines between the two colors. And just blending that out, going in just a little bit more towards the tree. And you can see it just looks like a deep red. It doesn't, you can't even tell it's a charcoal brown. So once I have that done, I am in love with Gina's pre-cut panels. So this is one of them, and all you have to do is score it. So I scored it at 5.5, and then just fold it in half and crease that with my bone folder. I have packs of these because this is so quick. I can just grab it for a card base and I'm ready to go. I don't have to do any additional cutting. And then just taking the Gina K Designs dot runner, I can just attach this to my card. So this is a really great one layer card if you wanted to leave it as is. I'm going to take it just a little bit further, and I'm using the seasonal sentiment stamp set, and I'm going to stamp an additional sentiment onto my card. So what I have here is a sentiment from our home to yours. That sentiment is actually one stamp, and I cut it so I could have it one straight line. And then just to straighten it, I'm going to use my Misty corners on my black cardstock. So I just lined those up as straight as I could, prepping my cardstock again with the anti-static powder tool. And then I'll ink that up with the VersaMark ink, stamp that down, and then I'm going to use some white embossing powder just to really make this pop off of the card. So what I'm creating here is just a small sentiment to add underneath my tree so that my card is going to say, "We wish you very Merry Christmas from our home to yours." And I just thought that worked really well together. Here you can see I'm just cleaning up some extra embossing powder that was stuck around the sentiment. I'm just using a paintbrush to kind of brush those away. And then I can heat that up and melt that embossing powder. Now you'll notice on the black cardstock you can kind of see the powder from that anti-static powder tool. So a nice trick that I've picked up is using one of these Swiffer cloths to kind of wipe that away, so that helps that black stand out a little bit better, removes that powder that was left over. And then one of my new favorite dies is this sentiment label die from Simon Says Stamp. So this has, as you can see, a few different sizes that you can use. I'm using the skinniest one, lining that up with my sentiment. I'm going to hold that down with Post-it tape and run that through my die cutting machine, and that is going to cut that tiny strip. Now I also want to add a little flag shape at the end. I only have one this size, so you can see I lined that up on one end, and I did the same thing to the other end, and it cuts just this perfect sentiment strip with those little flags at the end. And I'll be adding that right to the bottom of the card there. I'm going to add it with some foam squares. Now here, these are actually black foam squares. These work really well when you're using black cardstock. So if a person's looking from the side, it's not going to stick out like a sore thumb. You're not going to see white foam squares sticking out. They're black. And because my sentiment strip is so skinny, I'm just cutting these in half with some nonstick scissors and lining them up all along that sentiment strip. I want this to be even so that when I mail it, it's not going to dent in certain areas. So I'm just removing all of that backing from the foam squares. And then using my tweezers, I'm just going to line this up at the bottom. Now you could use a ruler. I tend to just eyeball things, and I hope I get lucky with it being straight. Now one more touch I wanted to add is I wanted to add some of these Nuvo drops. And then this is Silver Moon Dust. I like to do a little test off on some scratch paper to make sure I don't have any air bubbles. And then I'm just going through and adding just a couple little sparkles in there. Just kind of a nice finishing touch to my Christmas tree. And that doesn't take very long to dry. I'd say maybe a good hour. Since these are so tiny, there wasn't much to it. And now we have this gorgeous Christmas card ready to be mailed. This is another one that I made, and this is using one of the other sentiments from the stamp set, which is Merry Christmas to You, and I also did the From Our Home to Yours. So these are the first two that I'm going to show you. Now our next set of cards that I'll create are also using Gina K's ink pads and the same stamp set, but we're using the mini cubes. Mini cubes are very affordable. I have all of the mini cubes, and I'm slowly working on collecting the larger ink pads. But the mini cubes will work great for this. We're going to make our tree multicolored. So you could use any color of ink cubes for this. I'm sticking with the traditional Christmas colors. So for my first tree, I'm going to be using Christmas Pine, Lucky Clover, and Applemint ink pads. And what I like to do is I'm taking the tops off of all of these. I'm kind of keeping them in order so I have my darkest to lightest, lining them up on the side. It's just quicker this way for me. So I'm starting with the darkest color, which is the Christmas Pine, applying that to the top. Then the Lucky Clover. I'm going through the middle of the tree, kind of up into the Christmas Pine, and then the Applemint. Now, if you're worried about contaminating your ink pads with the darker color, you could use a sponge dauber to apply the inks. What I was doing just to make sure I didn't have any Christmas Pine in my Lucky Clover is I kind of ran my ink pad over onto some scratch paper, and it was perfectly fine. I didn't have any dark color in there. So once this was dry, I prepped my cardstock with an anti-static powder tool. I'm leaving my stamp in the same place that it is. This is kind of the fun part of using a MISTI tool, the benefit of using the MISTI tool. And I'm stamping right over that again with some VersaMark ink, and then I'm going to heat emboss this with some clear embossing powder. And this is just to give the card some shine. I'm really into the clean and simple mode right now, and the ink itself is a beautiful technique, having that two-toned or three-toned tree like this, but I thought just adding a little bit of shine would bring a little bit more to the clean and simple look. And you can see it has that beautiful shine to it. So while I had my MISTI out and the stamp set and my inks, I decided to make one more. Now this one, I am using a different sentiment from the A Very Merry Christmas stamp set, using the Gina K Designs white cardstock, and the colors are Warm Cocoa, Cherry Red, and Lipstick. Now like I said, if you're more comfortable using a sponge dauber, you could do that. I just went right to the stamp with my ink pads. Started with the Warm Cocoa and just stamped those through. Now you can see I did miss a spot there, so I'm going back over those areas. Another benefit of using the MISTI. You could just use an acrylic block, whatever your preference is. I just almost always use a MISTI because of situations like this. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm prepping that cardstock with that anti-static powder tool, inking it up with the VersaMark ink, stamping it down, making sure my magnet is holding that in place so it doesn't shift on me, and then heating embossing this with the clear embossing powder. So this is another card that would be really easy to mass produce. They're beautiful. You could really knock out a bunch of them if you have a lot of family members or co-workers that you wanted to make cards for. So what I did here now to kind of finish up these cards is I trimmed my panels down to 4 by 5 1/4. I added some craft foam behind that and then attached them to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch base. So I kept it still clean and simple. You could just leave it one layer if you want. I wanted to give it just a little bit of dimension. And for my red toned card here, I am using some of the metallic gold jewels from Pretty Pink Posh, and just attaching those on with the Gina K Connect glue. Just a couple here and there for some more sparkle. I have to have sparkle. And that card is finished. Now for my green one, my green toned card, I wanted to add a little bit of more color to it. I don't have any red jewels. All I have is the raspberry, and I actually really liked the raspberry. So I'm kind of adding those around, maybe giving the illusion of ornaments. So just placing those around the words, and then I'll attach these with the Connect glue as well. You can see I just a couple smaller ones. I tend to not use the bigger jewels as much, depending on what I'm working on. So these were just the perfect size to make them look like ornaments. And that will finish off this card. So I hope this gives you some ideas on making some clean and simple cards, finding uses for your ink pads, whether you have the large ink pads or the mini cubes. You could use either one for these techniques. And there's my little bit of sparkle. So if you did enjoy this video, I really would appreciate a big thumbs up, and you can subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so for some more inspiration. I will have all the supplies listed down below in the video description and also on my blog. And if you check out my blog, I will also have more examples using the November 2018 release from Gina K Designs. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.